I had mentioned earlier that there's more than one Ganondorf throughout the series. However, I hold beliefs that there are only two throughout the entire franchise. The reason I believe this is that there are only set instances where Ganondorf is ever killed. The rest of the instances are sealings or imprisonments. Now, here's a little notation for the scene in which the Triforce of Power appears on Ganondorf's hand. Originally, I had said that the goddesses had given Ganondorf his piece of the Triforce, and by divine intervention, destiny was fulfilled. After a somewhat strong argument from True Edge, I realized that this doesn't necessarily have to be the case for Ganondorf to attain his piece in Twilight Princess. And to explain this theory, let's go back to my model for OOT's parallel worlds. Now, 7 years do pass forward and backward, but for Link, all that he's doing is bridging the Sacred Realm. And obviously he remembers everything, so when he arrives back in the past, it's not as if he's just about to pull the sword for the first time. And this may just be speculation, but by traveling back and forth through the Sacred Realm, having constantly gained courage and experience due to his journey, the Sacred Realm is the resting place of the Triforce. So ironically, arriving into the past for the final time, Link could be the first in Hyrule A to hold a fragmented Triforce, given that his soul was overloaded with courage. And in time, the Triforces of Wisdom and Power inevitably found their wielders of Zelda and Ganondorf respectively. So in looking at it this way, no, divine intervention doesn't have anything to do with it anymore. Again, speculation, but very valid if we observe the manner in which Link travels back and forth a little more closely and a little bit more off the beaten path. I mean, people say it's time. I say it's the Sacred Realm now. And this also ties into the abrupt manner in which Ganondorf obtains the Triforce of Power in Twilight Princess, and it attempts to explain why Link's Triforce is resonating in the final moments of Ocarina of Time. I do believe the execution of Ganondorf takes place in the Child Ocarina of Time era, and quite soon after, in fact. This is where some people, True Edge included, tend to argue that it doesn't have to be the same Ganondorf, and one of True Edge's arguments is that he has facial hair. I have a little problem with that statement. While I do stick closely to in-game evidence, we have to be careful about artistic style changes. How often do games share similar concept art? Only if they're made with a direct sequel in mind, really. Did the post-Ocarina of Time Ganondorf suddenly mutate into a cartoon in the eyes of the Wind Waker citizens? No, it's just an artistic style difference designed to exercise the engine of each system that it's built for, and concept art is going to change often. I'd like people to keep in mind that if they look too closely into how someone looks, or as I stupidly used to, how the maps change and revolve, things are going to go wrong. Let's look more closely at the concept and not the appearance, because by that logic, Hyrule turns from a grand kingdom into a Saturday morning cartoon, and then back again. Now, moving on to A Link to the Past. This can now fit after Ocarina of Time, because according to my mold, the original Ganondorf is dead. And this new Ganondorf, Ganondorf Dragmire, as the English manual calls him, goes into the Golden Land, turns it into the Dark World by taking the whole Triforce, and, unfortunately for him, he can't get out. Let me try to explain my views on the Triforce given the limited knowledge we seem to have of it. So long as the Triforce is fragmented, and a piece is held by a living individual, it can never return to its original state until all three wielders are dead, or they're all brought together, whereupon it resets itself in the resting place of the Sacred Realm. What's my reasoning? Well, how about the most recent game? In Twilight Princess, before the story even begins, Ganondorf has the Triforce of Power, and almost randomly, the Triforce of Courage is given to Link, a lowly ranch hand, to allow him to have the wolf form in the Twilight Realm, as opposed to everybody else, who's a transparent lost soul who loses their physical form. Now, I say this because in A Link to the Past, we're told of a Ganondorf who crossed over into the Golden Land and actually managed to wield the full Triforce. This is the only time a Ganondorf has ever done this, which differs him significantly from the Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time, who now seems to be dead. Also, in this game, a difference maker is found: the silver arrows. They're very different from the light arrows or the Master Sword, neither of which have a history of actually destroying the evil of Ganondorf, only containing it. The silver arrows actually serve the purpose of killing Ganon. Notice that even the Master Sword or any other weapon in the games merely stun him. But there's a problem now. If Ganondorf can be fully destroyed by the Silver Arrows, why does this happen twice, both in A Link to the Past and in the original game? This is where we have to use a lot of context clues inside the game to discover what belongs on the left and what doesn't. I'm sorry, but there's nothing that ties A Link to the Past to the original 8-bit games anymore. I'm sorry. It's been established in 2 games that one very effective way of killing Ganon, perhaps the only way outside of the Triforce leaving him in Twilight Princess, is the Silver Arrows. Anything else has only served as a temporary seal. So, in looking at this, what does belong here and what doesn't? Well, in A Link to the Past, the Triforce has been reset in the Sacred Realm. But it's clearly after Ocarina of Time, and in my opinion, after the death of the first Ganondorf in Twilight Princess. Ganon has the full Triforce and doesn't manage to escape the Dark World in time before he's sealed away by the 7 Wise Men, who I believe are different from the 7 Sages. Hyrule is also far more civilized and intact than the 8-bit games. Very curious indeed. So let's move on to the 8-bit games. Do they belong on the left anymore? Well, to start with, let's look at Hyrule. What in this map is recognizable besides Death Mountain and Spectacle Rock, and maybe the Lost Woods? In all honesty, nothing. The world is ravaged, the sea level seems awfully high, and there's very little here to suggest that Ganon's monsters could have wiped out such a grand kingdom, leaving absolutely no traces behind. Now obviously, this is partially due to the limitations of the original NES, but it's still in-game evidence. Let's look at the Triforce. Hey, it's split. Now as I said, this has been a rough concept ever since the very first Zelda title, and it's been a telltale calling card of the imbalance of the original Ganondorf, and his ability to wield the whole thing. If it's split, who's to say this isn't the original Ganondorf? How is Ganondorf killed? Well, the Silver Arrows. And again, I find it no coincidence that these are a weapon that are only used twice in the Zelda series. I do not believe the light arrows are the same thing. They have far different functions, too different in my opinion to be declared the same thing. Where one is meant to seal and contain evil, the other is meant to outright destroy it. And hey, let's look at the sequel for a little bit more evidence. Ganon seems to be unable to return on his own, so that's a sign that the Silver Arrows did their job. His minions required the sacrifice of Link to bring him back. Also curious is that Hyrule is due north of Death Mountain, an area not explored in any other Zelda game besides this one. Why? What could necessitate leaving the old Hyrule forever? If the people relocated because of Ganon's reign of terror in Zelda 1, why don't they just go back and reclaim what they had lost? My guess is that this is the land that Link and Tetra had found in Wind Waker, and the original 8-bit title is the ravaged remains of what had actually been destroyed by the Flood. This is where a lot of people will disagree with me and say that the original Zelda would have died in the Flood. Now, I'd like people to reanalyze this fact and take in the possibility that this might not actually be the very first Zelda, but the original Zelda of this new Hyrule, north of Death Mountain. Think about it. The backstory is very flawed with recent games to have come out. It's said that the first king of Hyrule unified the land with the Triforce. But hang on a second. The Triforce had been hidden in the Sacred Realm, supposedly undisturbed for an eternity until OOT. We have a discrepancy here. Unless the King of Hyrule is in fact the Hero of Men, referenced in the Minish Cap. I'll get more into this when I discuss the Escort titles. Lastly, I'd like everyone to take a look at a very important bit of information. The names of the towns in Adventure of Link. Sound familiar? They should, as all but one of them was named after the sages in Ocarina of Time, the adult ending of Ocarina of Time. Now, on to the sages. Why are the towns named this? Ocarina of Time gave a very important reason, their success at having sealed Ganondorf. Rauru, Saria, Darunia, Rudo, and Nabaru were all of different races that struck back against the evil king millennia beforehand. It's not impossible to believe that their descendants passed down the legend of their ancestors' part in that sealing. Evidence or speculation? Well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. Let's also remember that in Adventure of Link, like The Legend of Zelda, Hyrule is surrounded by a great deal of water. So the waters that flooded the land are receding bit by bit, but the process hasn't finished yet and probably won't for still thousands of years. So it's all this that forces me to move The Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link to the opposite fork in the timeline, after Spirit Tracks. Also at the very end, due to Ganondorf's destruction.